What's up, Failroaders? I'm Joshua Thomas, and you're here for part 7 of our How to Play Star Wars Rebellion and Rise of the Empire expansion. This is going to just deal with the base game because right now we're going to talk about everything you need to know about combat. Combat is probably the most complex single thing that you can do in Star Wars Rebellion, and that's why I've got the book sitting right in front of me so that I can make sure that I get everything right. I've even looked online for errata and questions posed by the community. So hopefully I got everything in this. Now, Rise of the Empire combat is going to be settled in part 7.5, which will be a separate video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with base game combat. So whenever enemy units are in the same sector and theater, a battle commences. This is either going to be on ground or in space. The first thing that you can do is assign leaders to the combat. For the sake of simplifying this, in the initial explanation, we're just going to say that both leaders have values of 1. These tactical values are the numbers in blue and orange at the bottom corners of each leader card. Once leaders have been placed, you can commence action cards that say Start of Combat. We're not going to use any of those right now. Just don't forget that you have these little cards when you play an advanced game of the base game. Now keep in mind, in a team game, a player cannot add their leader to the combat if the other person has already added a leader with combat values. No matter how many leaders are in a sector when a battle commences, only one leader can ever be added to that area at the start of combat. Once combat has commenced, if there's already leaders in the area who have combat abilities, then there's no need to add an additional leader. However, if the leader who is there doesn't have any combat abilities, then you can add a leader. It's important to note that in a team game, the Admiral takes care of space combat, while the General takes care of ground combat, and that encompasses everything that has to do with it, including ground tactic cards and space tactic cards. Keep in mind that in order to draw tactic cards of a certain theater, you have to have enemy units of both types in that theater. So if there's no ground unit, there is no ground battle and no need to draw the orange ground tactic cards. Likewise, if there are no enemies in the space battle. For the sake of this simplified version, we're going to say that they're both there. The player who initiated the attack is going to be the first person to draw tactic cards from either battle deck. Once tactic cards have been drawn, then each player resolves an attack, starting with the person who initiated the attack. We'll say the Empire is the aggressor in this situation. They will roll their dice. Then, based on their dice rolls, they will either apply special tactic cards or draw more tactic cards. Then they're going to use tactic cards that maybe don't need the special symbol. Notice these tactic cards don't have the special crossed lightsaber symbol, which means you don't have to have one rolled in order to use them. I'll show you an example of what the crossed lightsaber symbol looks like on one of the special tactic cards. In order to play a tactic card that has this symbol on it in either theater, you have to spend one of these dice in order to be able to use it. But we'll get into that later. So in this situation, the Empire has played the No Escape tactic card, which means that the rebels can't retreat this turn. Then they're going to roll dice based on their ship's attack ability, which happens to be 1 red and 1 black dice. Let's say they get a direct hit so that they can destroy or cause damage to this X-Wing. This X-Wing would then have to go to the Rebel player's player board, but it's not over yet because that X-Wing can still attack. Once damage has been resolved, the X-Wing player can play a card to block damage. So, since they only dealt 1 damage and blocked 1 damage, the X-Wing is no longer at risk of being destroyed. Let's say that it did get an attack through and it destroyed the X-Wing, leaving only this Rebel transport to fight. The Rebel transport has no attack value, so it can't fight. Therefore, its attack round gets skipped unless it's got some special card that it can play that might damage the other player. We would then move to the ground combat, where it's pretty equal. It's just 1 troop versus 1 troop. They would each roll 1 black dice. The Rebel player blocks 1 damage, but the Imperial player dealt 1 damage. In this case, you might want to track it with a damage marker, and we'll say that the Imperial player got another hit on the Rebel player. It's always possible to deal your opponents more damage than they have health value for. So this allows you to be able to cause enough damage to prevent them from blocking too much, because since they block 1 damage with this card, you can take that 1 damage away, but they still have the damage from this previous card, and they are sent to their player board. Now, that Rebel still gets to attack, and they get a direct hit also, which would end up killing this Imperial soldier. Now that it's at the end of the combat round, this transport has no choice but to retreat, or it will get destroyed. Now that you've gotten the basic concepts of a battle, we're going to go a little bit more in-depth, and we're going to show a couple different scenarios that can happen. So let's focus on Naboo right here with 2 Rebel troops. They're in some pretty big trouble. Now these leaders have already performed missions here and are just in this area. So General Veers is going to activate this system in order to move in troops from the neighboring system. And he's not going to move in very many because, well, this is pretty much a surefire win for him. Since Mon Mothma has no tactics abilities, you can send in another person, and why not send in Obi-Wan Kenobi, because he has ground tactics of 3. The Initiator of Combat is going to draw their 3 ground tactic cards first, followed by the Defender, the Rebels, who will get their 3 ground tactic cards. Then, starting with the attacker, they would get to use any action cards, if they had any, that said at the start of combat, and then the defender would get to use theirs. We're going to look at one more situation in which you can get into a major conflict, and this time we're going to look at a huge battle. First, let's talk about stats. These are the dice rolls that you can use to damage enemy units. Keep in mind that small ships and small ground units have black damage, or gray health values, and capital ships and larger ground units have red health. So, in order to deal black damage, you can roll a hit or a direct hit, or a hit and a crit as I like to call it, with black dice, or a direct hit on a red dice. In order to deal red damage, you can do a hit and a crit on red dice, or you can do a crit on black dice. The number of dice that these units can roll is represented by the symbol that kind of matches the hit symbol. So an X-Wing can roll 1 black dice, whereas the Y-Wing can roll 1 red dice. Capital ships, on the other hand, might get to roll both dice, or a mixture of the dice. Same thing with the ground units. Occasionally, units will have a special type of health, such as the Death Star, which has no rating for health, but can still roll 4 red dice. We'll talk more about that when we do the video on the Death Star. So we're gonna move our camera over here so that we can focus on Rhodia, where there is a sizable rebel fleet, and these Imperials right here want to go in and destroy them. So once again, we'll say Darth Vader hasn't done anything. No, actually, we'll use the Emperor. The Emperor's on the Death Star and looking to attack. And so everybody moves in, including the Superstar Destroyer, several ground units, another Star Destroyer, and the Death Star. Now, unbeknownst to them, this also happens to be the secret rebel base. So, once ground units have moved onto the planet, all the units in the rebel base must then be moved onto the board. Now notice that the board's getting a little bit crowded and it's kind of hard to tell where units are. In this situation, you can have units overlapping other boundaries as long as everyone knows which units are technically in the battle and which units are not. So now that the Empire has been drawn into a hornet's nest and they can't retreat because they've got the Death Star there, they're now going to have to encounter a combat. Now the Rebel player is going to bring in Luke Skywalker, and they're both once again going to draw their cards. I've already done this to expedite the process. And trust me when I say the Imperials have enough combat power to roll all 10 dice. Actually, they have enough combat power to roll more than 10 dice. However, in the rules it states that you can ever only roll 5 black dice and 5 red dice in any one attack round. So the Empire will roll, dice yard sale, all 10 of their dice. Separate their hits. Into what we have here. Once again, we're in the space combat, so they can only play space tactic cards right now. And they are going to spend one of their crossed lightsabers to play the Onslaught. The Onslaught deals 1 damage to 2 different ships. And in this case, they're going to deal that damage to each of the Corellian corvettes. And they'll mark it with a damage marker. Now the rest of these shots are going to go into either the starships with their black health, which means they're going to take away, say, 2 X-Wings. They can use a direct hit for either a capital ship or a starfighter. So let's say they take away another Y-Wing, and then their 1 red hit, let's say they put it on one of the other Corellian corvettes so that it will also be damaged. Now all of these units are being put on the player mat to represent that they will be destroyed unless the rebel player has a way of blocking that damage. Since the rebel player doesn't have a way of blocking that damage, these units will be destroyed, but it is now the rebel player's turn to have a fight. So these units will be destroyed, but they still get to make their 1 attack, because technically attacks happen simultaneously. Trust me also when I say the rebel players have enough firepower to roll all 10 dice. Now one thing I forgot to mention was that there's this ion cannon here. And this ion cannon reduces the enemy's dice roll by 2 red dice. However, this minus happens before the dice limitation. So I calculated that the Imperials could technically roll 10 red dice. So 10 minus 2 is 8. 8 is still more than the limit of 5, which means they still get to roll their 5 dice. So now we're gonna roll dice for the rebels, still in the space theater, and we can see that their rolls didn't turn out too well. So they've got one red hit to put onto one of the capital ships, and they will do that. We'll make it simple and we'll put it on the Star Destroyer. And then they've got these 3 crossed lightsabers, which they can attempt to use, but they're also going to use Concentrate Fire, which allows them to reroll 2 of their dice. Let's reroll 2 of these black dice. We got one more hit in there. Now that we've got a black hit, we can take out one of the TIE fighters. And the Imperials don't have a card that allows them to block any damage either. Now that the end of the space battle is upon us, we then destroy all the units that are on our faction cards. So the Rebels took a pretty heavy loss, and the Empire only lost 1 TIE fighter and took a little bit of damage elsewhere. It then goes to the ground battle. Now, on the ground, we have a shield generator, which allows the Rebel to draw a ground tactic card at the beginning of each ground battle turn. We're then going to count up our ground attack ability. In this case, the Rebels don't quite have enough to max out their dice. They will get to max out their black dice. However, they're only going to get to fire 2 red dice, because there's only 2 snow speeders, so this is what they're going to get to roll. We'll roll the dice, and this is the roll they got. Very simple. They'll then get to apply all of these hits, and it looks like they can get rid of the stormtroopers. I thought I sent in 3, but oh well. And then give 1 direct hit to one of the remaining AT-STs. Now they've also got their ground tactic cards that they can use, but they both require a special dice roll symbol, which they didn't get. And now it's the Empire's turn. Remember, the stormtroopers over here on the faction card still get to fire, so that's going to be 2 dice. And the AT-STs also get to attack with their 2 black and 2 red dice. Pretty bad on those rolls too. They're going to do a critical hit, which deals 1 damage. Now they want that shield generator to be destroyed, so they're going to put that damage marker under the shield generator. The shield generator has 3 health, along with the ion shield or ion cannon that also has 3 health. So they're going to take these 2 hits and also apply them to the shield generator. So now it has its health value in hits, and it'll be destroyed unless the Rebels can do something about it. Then they'll take 1 black hit and destroy one of the Rebel troopers. The Rebel player chooses to block one of the damages, and so it's going to take that 1 damage away from the shield generator so that it doesn't get destroyed, but still remains with 2 damage. So that brings us to the end of 1 ground combat. Now, I skipped over the step in the game where the Rebel players would be able to use their fighters for a trench run. This can only happen if you have the Death Star Plan's objective card for the Rebel player. And we're going to cover that in much greater detail in our next chapter, which is going to be all about the Death Star. So let's fast forward through this battle here and say that the Rebel space battle is going pretty badly and they've lost a bunch of their ships, but the Rebels ground battle is going pretty good and they've destroyed all of their enemies with only minor damages. Even though one side is winning in one theater and the other side is winning in another theater, you can still have your units retreat in order to save them. Let's say this is how the battle has progressed, and the Rebel space battle is looking pretty bad, but they've won on the ground. So what they can do is opt to retreat. Even though they can't take everyone with them, Luke Skywalker is going to have to go to a planet that's adjacent with no enemy troops in it and take his units with him, and he's going to have to take 2 ground units with him as well because he can retreat with those. This saves his space fleet while still leaving ground units on the Rebel base to defend it. The Rebel base stays in Rebel hands with Rebel loyalty, but the Empire rules the skies above them. It's possible for one side to win the space battle and the other side to win the ground battle, and for the map to look like this afterwards. With this, on Rhodia, the Rebels cannot deploy units to this planet. Now let's talk about some other important notes that we may have skipped over in these battle simulations. Number 1 is that the Death Star under construction, if you go in for an attack and you wipe out the space fleet that's protecting it, it is automatically destroyed. If we had retreated as many units as we could to this sector, and there was still a ground battle going on, the ground battle would continue. Likewise, if it was the Empire that had to retreat, and they had to leave some of their TIE fighters behind because of carrying capacity limitations, they would continue to have a space battle. These battles would end when one side defeats the other in each theater. When retreating, it's important to note that the retreating party cannot retreat into a space that is also occupied by enemy territory. They must retreat into a space that they have loyalty in, or into a neutral space that contains no enemy units. In that order. And oddly enough, in a team game, one player can choose to retreat as long as they use one of their leaders. In other words, the Admiral uses the blue leaders and the General uses the orange leaders. So if your opponent retreats all of their units out of a system, technically you have won the battle. Likewise, if you destroy all of their units, you've also won the battle. If you destroy all of their units in one theater, you win the battle in that theater, and they might win the battle in the other theater. If you destroy your opponent's ships, but you lose the ground battle and you decide to retreat, you're still considered to have won the space battle. And once again, if 2 players just completely destroy each other, then there technically is no winner. So with the mission cards and objective cards that require you to win a battle, those are the conditions for which winning occurs. Another thing to consider when planning your retreat, or whether you want to stay and fight, is when combat is over, any damage that was under the units gets removed. Space combat can happen in a destroyed system. Land units can still be in a destroyed system, however, if their ship that they're on gets destroyed, those units are also wiped out as well. If TIE fighters are in a destroyed system and their transport units are destroyed, well, they're spaceships, so they'll be okay, right? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was a ton of information to cram into your heads. I hope I did it as clearly as possible, and I hope I didn't miss anything. If you think I did, or if you've got any questions, comment below, and I'll hopefully be able to clarify things. But yeah, so hope you enjoyed that. The next video is going to be the second part to our combat video, which is going to have to do with the Rise of the Empire expansion combat system. It's different enough that we figure it needs its own video. So, until next time, hope you enjoy our videos. Like and subscribe. Click that bell next to the subscribe button in order to get updates for when we upload the rest of these videos. And hope you'll check out the rest of the videos on the Failroad Express. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time. Hey, is there a question that you had that this video didn't answer? Leave a comment below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But keep in mind that your answer might just be in a different video if it's in a different category. Thanks for watching.